London, 1813. Miss Diana Lockwood stared in horror at the letter in her trembling hands. The black ink blurred as her eyes filled with unshed tears, her father's decisive script delivering the most dreadful news imaginable. Married, she whispered, the word like ashes on her tongue, to a stranger. Diana crushed the letter in her fist, then immediately regretted it, smoothing the paper against her writing desk. The facts remained unchanged, no matter how she abused the messenger. Her father had arranged her marriage to a gentleman she had never met, never even heard mentioned in polite society. The wedding was to take place in a fortnight, with or without her consent. With or without my consent, she repeated aloud, bitter laughter escaping her lips. As if my consent has ever mattered. Marriage was nothing but a business arrangement, a truth Diana had accepted long ago. Her own mother had taught her this, whispering advice from her deathbed when Diana was barely 16. Marry for security, for position, for protection, never for love, my darling. Love is a fantasy that will only bring you pain. Diana had witnessed enough loveless matches among the ton to believe her mother's wisdom. The few marriages begun with passion inevitably soured into public scandals or private miseries. She had resigned herself to an advantageous match, had prepared herself to be a dutiful wife to some aging lord or ambitious politician of her father's choosing. But this, to be bartered away to an unknown man, a Mr. Graham Kensington, whose name appeared nowhere in Debrett peerage, this was beyond endurance. Miss, her lady's maid appeared at the doorway. Your father requests your presence in his study immediately. Diana squared her shoulders. Tell him I shall be down presently. She tucked the letter into her desk drawer, donned the armor of perfect posture and placid expression that society demanded of its daughters, and descended to meet her fate. Lord Henry Lockwood, a widower of rigid principles and extensive gambling debts, did not rise when his daughter entered his study. He merely gestured for her to sit across from him, continuing to sort through a stack of correspondence. You've read my letter, he stated rather than asked. Yes, father. Diana's voice remained steady despite the turmoil within. I confess I find myself curious about this Mr. Kensington. I don't recall ever making his acquaintance. Her father's jaw tightened. The arrangement is advantageous. Mr. Kensington possesses considerable resources and has agreed to settle that is, our family's, outstanding obligations. You're selling me to pay your gambling debts, Diana said flatly. Lord Lockwood slammed his hand on the desk. I am securing your future. Without this marriage we face ruin. The house, your dowry, everything gone. Diana's fingernails dug into her palms beneath her gloves. May I at least meet this man before I am delivered to him like a parcel? You will meet at the wedding. Mr. Kensington is currently attending to business matters in the north. Her father's tone softened slightly. Diana, I know this is not what you hoped for, but he has promised to treat you with respect. He is young, not some ancient lecher, and by all accounts, respectable in his habits. How reassuring, she murmured. Is there anything else you can tell me about the man who will own me for the remainder of my days? Her father shifted uncomfortably. He values his privacy. The marriage contract is most generous. You will want for nothing. Nothing except choice, Diana thought bitterly. Nothing except love, respect, partnership. When she remained silent, Lord Lockwood sighed. The arrangements are complete. Madame Belcourt will arrive tomorrow to begin work on your wedding clothes. With that dismissal, Diana rose and left the study, her mind racing with desperate plans for escape, each more impossible than the last. 2 weeks later, Diana stood in St. George's Church, a vision in ivory satin and Brussels lace, awaiting her first glimpse of the man she was to marry. The small congregation consisted primarily of her father's creditors, eager to witness the transaction that would secure their payment. He's arrived, her father murmured, offering his arm. Diana took a deep breath and turned to face her future. A tall figure in dark blue entered from a side door, moving to stand at the altar with his back to her. Broad shoulders, straight posture, dark hair curling at his nape. These were all she could discern before the organist began the wedding march. Each step down the aisle felt like a march to execution. Diana focused on breathing, on placing one foot before the other, on maintaining the serene expression expected of a bride. Inside, she repeated her mother's mantra, "Marriage is a business arrangement. Expect nothing more." When she reached the altar and finally faced her groom, Diana nearly gasped aloud. Mr. Graham Kensington was young, perhaps 30, and possessed of the kind of masculine beauty that caused whispers behind fans at society gatherings. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes of startling clarity, a blue so deep it bordered on violet. Those extraordinary eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance, but his expression remained otherwise inscrutable. "Miss Lockwood," he said with a formal bow, his voice deep and melodious. "Mr. Kensington," she replied, cursing the breathless quality of her voice. The ceremony proceeded with brisk efficiency. Diana spoke her vows mechanically, feeling as though she observed the proceedings from a great distance. When Mr. Kensington, now her husband, slipped a heavy gold band onto her finger, his touch was gentle, almost hesitant. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the vicar announced, and just like that, Diana Lockwood ceased to exist, replaced by Mrs. Graham Kensington, a woman married to a stranger. The wedding breakfast was a strained affair. Diana picked at her food while her new husband conversed quietly with her father. She observed him surreptitiously, searching for clues about his character. His manners were impeccable, his speech educated without affectation. Yet something about him seemed oddly familiar, though she was certain they had never met. When the meal concluded, her father pressed a dry kiss to her cheek. "Be a good wife, Diana," he murmured. "Remember your duty." Then she was handed into a luxurious carriage bearing an unfamiliar crest, seated beside a husband she did not know, bound for a destination he had not shared. They travelled in silence for nearly half an hour before Diana could bear it no longer. "Where are we going, Mr. Kensington?" she asked, proud of how composed she sounded. He glanced at her, those remarkable eyes unreadable. "Kensington House, my estate in Berkshire." "I see," she smoothed her gloves. "And what should I expect there?" "Comfort, I hope." A small frown appeared between his brows. "The house is well appointed, the staff competent. You will have your own suite of rooms, of course." "Of course," she echoed. Another silence descended, this one even more awkward than the last. Diana stared out the window at the passing landscape, fighting unexpected tears. She had prepared herself for a marriage of convenience, but not for this strange coldness, this feeling of being an unwanted obligation. "Mrs. Kensington," he said suddenly, causing her to turn toward him. "I wish to assure you that despite the unusual circumstances of our union, I intend to be a considerate husband. You will have freedom to manage the household as you see fit, to invite companions of your choosing, to pursue whatever occupations interest you." "How generous," Diana replied, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her tone. "And what will you be doing while I am thus occupied?" A shadow passed over his handsome features. "I have business interests that require my attention. I may be absent frequently." "A marriage in name only then," she said quietly. "For now that seems best," he replied, his expression guarded. "I believe neither of us entered this arrangement with romantic expectations." Diana turned back to the window, blinking rapidly. "No, indeed, Mr. Kensington, I harbour no such delusions." Yet as they continued their journey in silence, Diana found herself wondering why his declaration of a distant, practical marriage should leave her feeling so inexplicably disappointed. Kensington House proved to be a magnificent estate, its Palladian architecture gleaming golden in the afternoon sun. As the carriage approached along a tree-lined drive, Diana could not help but be impressed by the symmetrical facade, the immaculate gardens, the air of quiet prosperity. "It's beautiful," she said, breaking another long silence. "Thank you." Something in his voice, pride, perhaps, or genuine pleasure at her approval, made her look at him more closely. For an instant, his formal mask slipped, revealing a younger, more vulnerable countenance. Then it was gone, replaced by the polite stranger who had been her companion throughout the journey. The staff was assembled to greet them, a neat row of servants headed by a dignified housekeeper who introduced herself as Mrs. Winters. Diana was shown to her chambers, a stunning suite decorated in shades of blue and silver, and left to the ministrations of a maid who had been engaged specifically for her. "Will you be joining Mr. Kensington for dinner, madam?" the girl asked as she unpacked Diana's trunks. Diana hesitated. "I'm not certain. What is customary?" The maid, Lucy, looked surprised. Mr. Kensington always dines at 7, madam. The previous housekeeper said he never varies his routine. Previous housekeeper. Diana filed this information away. Then please have a bath prepared and lay out something suitable for dinner. Bathed and dressed in a gown of pale green silk, one of the few from her trousseau that had not been hastily made for the wedding, Diana ventured downstairs, guided by a footman to a small dining room where her husband awaited. Graham Kensington rose as she entered, his expression warming slightly. Mrs. Kensington, I hope you found your accommodation satisfactory. More than satisfactory, Diana replied, allowing a footman to seat her. The suite is lovely. I'm glad, he signaled for the first course to be served. Mrs. Winters mentioned you might wish to redecorate. Please feel free to make any changes you desire. Diana took a sip of wine, studying him over the rim of her glass. Have you lived here long, Mr. Kensington? A barely perceptible hesitation. The estate has been in my family for several generations, but I have only recently taken up residence. I see, she sampled the soup, which was excellent. And your family, will I have the pleasure of meeting them? My parents are deceased, he replied, his tone flat. I have no siblings. I'm sorry, Diana said softly. I lost my mother 5 years ago. It's difficult. For the first time, genuine emotion crossed his face, a flash of sympathy quickly controlled. Yes, it is. The remainder of the meal passed in fits and starts of conversation. Diana learned that her husband enjoyed writing, that he preferred Shakespeare to modern poetry, that he had travelled extensively on the continent before the war made such journeys impossible. Yet for every fact she gleaned, a dozen questions remained unanswered. His business, his past, his reasons for choosing her, all remained mysteries. As the final course was cleared away, Graham set aside his napkin and stood. If you'll excuse me, I have correspondence to attend to. Please make yourself at home. The library is well stocked, should you desire reading material. Diana remained seated, her hands folded in her lap. When will we discuss the true nature of our arrangement, Mr. Kensington? He paused, his expression shuddering. I'm afraid I don't understand. I believe you do. Diana met his gaze steadily. My father's debts, your conditions. The reason you chose a bride you had never met. A muscle ticked in his jaw. Your father's financial situation has been resolved. The details need not concern you. They concern me greatly, as I appear to be the payment, Diana said, her voice even despite the anger bubbling beneath. Graham's eyes flashed. You are my wife, not a transaction. Am I? She rose, facing him across the table. Then why marry a woman you've never met? Why the secrecy, the conditions, the distance you so carefully maintain? What do you want from this marriage, Mr. Kensington? What every man wants, he answered, his voice low and controlled. A respectable wife, heirs, companionship. In that order, Diana challenged. A flush crept up his neck. It is late, Mrs. Kensington, and we are both tired from the journey. Perhaps we should continue this conversation when tempers are cooler. Diana recognized the dismissal. With a tight nod, she swept past him toward the door. Just before exiting, she turned back. One more question, if I may. Have we met before today? Graham's expression froze. No, he said after a moment, we have not. But as Diana retired to her rooms, she couldn't shake the feeling that her husband had just lied to her, and that somewhere in that lie lay the key to understanding their strange marriage. The following weeks established a pattern that, while not unpleasant, left Diana increasingly frustrated. Graham was unfailingly polite, attentive in company, and generous with household funds. He accompanied her to church on Sundays, introduced her to the local gentry, and ensured she had everything she could materially desire. Yet he remained an enigma. He spent long hours in his study with mysterious correspondence, rode out early each morning to destinations unknown, and maintained that careful distance that had marked their first meeting. They dined together each evening, conversed about books and music and local gossip, but never about anything personal, anything real. They had not shared a bed. Diana's chambers remained her exclusive domain, a situation she told herself she preferred. After all, theirs was a marriage of convenience, not passion. Yet sometimes, when Graham's guard dropped and he laughed genuinely at something she said, or when their hands accidentally touched reaching for the same item, Diana felt an unwelcome flutter of attraction. It was during the 3rd week of their marriage that Diana made her first significant discovery. While exploring the estate on a rainy afternoon, she found herself in the portrait gallery, a long chamber lined with paintings of Kensington's past. She moved slowly down the line, noting family resemblances, the same strong jaw, the same distinctive blue eyes that her husband possessed. At the end of the gallery hung the most recent portraits, a handsome couple in the fashion of 20 years prior, and beside them, a painting that made Diana stop short. 2 young men, perhaps 20 and 16, stood together in hunting attire. The elder was unmistakably Graham, though younger and more carefree than she had ever seen him. The younger boy shared his coloring, but had a slighter build and a mischievous smile. "My brother," came a voice from behind her. Diana turned to find Graham standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You told me you had no siblings." "I don't, not anymore." He moved to stand beside her, gazing up at the portrait. "George died 8 years ago." "I'm sorry," Diana said softly. "Was it illness?" Graham's jaw tightened. A duel, ostensibly over cards, but in truth over a woman. A woman who encouraged his attentions while being secretly engaged to another. Diana studied the painting more closely. The younger brother's smile now seemed not mischievous but naive, trusting. He was very young. 20. Barely out of Cambridge. Graham's voice held a bitter edge she had never heard before. He was brilliant, charming, full of life, and utterly defenseless against practiced deceit. Diana turned to look at her husband, seeing real pain etched in the lines around his eyes. What happened to the woman? She married her fiancé a month later, a viscount with extensive properties and an ancient title. His gaze remained fixed on the portrait. She showed no remorse. Not publicly, at least. Something cold settled in Diana's stomach. This woman, what was her name? Graham's eyes, when they finally met hers, were arctic. Lady Caroline Lockwood. "Your cousin, I believe." Diana felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. "Caroline, but you didn't know," Graham finished for her, his tone softening slightly at her obvious shock. "No, I realized that early in our acquaintance." "Our acquaintance?" Diana repeated, confused. "Today is the first time we've discussed your brother." A strange expression crossed his face. "Of course." "You're right." Before she could question him further, he excused himself, leaving Diana alone with the portraits and a growing certainty that her marriage contained depths she had only begun to plumb. That evening, Diana retired early, pleading a headache. In truth, her mind was too unsettled for dinner conversation. She had spent the afternoon piecing together what little she knew. Graham's brother had died in a duel involving her cousin Caroline, a notorious flirt who had indeed married Viscount Harding 8 years prior. Graham clearly harbored resentment toward the Lockwood family, yet he had specifically sought marriage to a Lockwood. Was their marriage some form of revenge? The thought made her blood run cold. Yet if revenge was his motive, why treat her with such consistent courtesy? Why marry her at all, rather than simply ruin her father financially? More puzzling was his slip regarding their acquaintance. Diana was certain they had never met before the wedding, yet something about him had seemed familiar from the first. Unable to sleep, she donned a wrapper over her nightgown and lit a candle, intending to find a book from her sitting room. As she crossed the darkened chamber, a floorboard creaked in the corridor outside. Diana froze, listening. Another creak, then another. Someone was pacing outside her door. Heart pounding, she set down her candle and moved silently to press her ear against the polished wood. Nothing for a long moment, then a soft sigh that could only be Graham. What was he doing outside her room at this hour? Was he considering entering? The thought sent a confusing mixture of fear and anticipation through her. Before she could decide whether to confront him, his footsteps retreated down the corridor. Diana waited until they faded entirely before returning to her bed, her thoughts even more tumultuous than before. "I've been invited to Lady Winthrop's garden party on Thursday," Diana announced at breakfast the following morning. "Will you accompany me?" Graham looked up from his newspaper, surprise evident in his expression. If you wish it. I do. Diana buttered a piece of toast with deliberate care. As we've received several invitations since our marriage, yet attended none together, I thought it might be beneficial to present ourselves as a united couple. A sound strategy. He folded the newspaper, his movements precise. Though I should warn you, I am not particularly sociable. Diana sipped her tea. So I've observed, yet you must have moved in society at some point. Your manners betray a proper upbringing. Before George's death, yes. He shifted slightly, discomfort evident. Afterward, I found little pleasure in ballrooms and drawing rooms. And yet you chose a bride from precisely such an environment, Diana noted. One might question your logic. Graham's gaze sharpened. One might, he agreed, if one were in the habit of questioning one's husband. Fortunately, I am developing just such a habit, Diana replied sweetly. To her surprise, a reluctant smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. So I've noticed. He hesitated, then added, the carriage will be at your disposal whenever you wish to call on Lady Winthrop. I have some business to attend to this morning, but I shall return in time to accompany you on Thursday. Diana nodded, accepting the compromise. Thank you, and Graham. He looked up, startled by her use of his given name. I would appreciate more honesty between us, she said softly. Whatever your reasons for this marriage, I am now your wife. I deserve to know the truth. For a moment she thought he might confide in her. Something vulnerable flickered in his eyes, a hesitation that spoke of internal struggle. Then the moment passed, and his expression cooled. Some truths are best left unspoken, Diana, he said quietly, for both our sakes. Lady Winthrop's garden party was a lavish affair, with the county's most prominent families in attendance. Diana, attired in a new gown of periwinkle muslin, was conscious of the curious glances directed at her and her husband as they arrived. Everyone is staring, she murmured as Graham handed her down from the carriage. You're a beautiful woman with a new husband no one knows, he replied. Of course they're staring. The casual compliment, delivered without flattery or expectation, brought a flush to Diana's cheeks. Before she could respond, Lady Winthrop descended upon them with exclamations of delight. Mrs. Kensington, Mr. Kensington, how wonderful that you could join us. The elderly hostess peered at Graham with undisguised curiosity. I declare, sir, you look familiar, though I cannot place where we might have met. I doubt we have, Lady Winthrop, Graham replied smoothly. I've been abroad for many years. Ah, that explains it, she patted Diana's hand. You must tell me everything about your whirlwind romance, my dear. The ton has been abuzz with speculation. Diana forced a smile. I fear the reality is far less exciting than the speculation. Nonsense, Lady Winthrop declared. A mysterious gentleman appears from nowhere and carries off one of London's loveliest daughters. That's the stuff of novels, my dear. As Lady Winthrop led them toward the refreshment tables, introducing them to various guests along the way, Diana noted Graham's increasing tension. His responses grew more clipped, his posture more rigid with each introduction. When Lady Winthrop finally left them to greet new arrivals, Diana laid a gentle hand on his arm. Are you unwell? She asked quietly. I'm fine, he replied, though his expression suggested otherwise. I had forgotten how exhausting these affairs can be. Diana was about to suggest they find a quieter spot in the gardens when a familiar voice called her name. She turned to see her cousin Caroline approaching, resplendent in a gown of emerald silk that emphasized her famous figure. Diana, darling, Caroline embraced her with excessive enthusiasm. Marriage clearly agrees with you. You're positively glowing. Diana returned the embrace stiffly, acutely aware of Graham beside her. Caroline, I wasn't aware you were in the country. Harding had business with his steward, Caroline said dismissively, her curious gaze already fixed on Graham. And you must be the mysterious Mr. Kensington. I've been dying to meet the man who swept our Diana off her feet. Graham executed a perfect bow, his expression a mask of politeness. Lady Harding. A pleasure. Caroline's eyes narrowed slightly. Have we met before, sir? You seem familiar. I don't believe so, Graham replied, his voice devoid of emotion. I would certainly remember such an encounter. Diana watched the exchange with growing unease. Caroline studied Graham with the predatory interest she reserved for handsome men, while Graham regarded her with a coldness that bordered on contempt, though his manners remained impeccable. Well, you must join us for dinner before we return to London, Caroline said, directing her invitation primarily to Graham. I insist on becoming better acquainted with Diana's husband. You're most kind, Graham replied, but I fear our social calendar is quite full at present. Caroline's smile tightened. Perhaps another time, then. As she sashayed away, Diana released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank you for declining. I have no desire to dine with Caroline. Graham's gaze followed her cousin's retreating figure. She doesn't recognize me, he said quietly, almost to himself. 8 years, and she doesn't even recognize me. Before Diana could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance to the garden. Lord Harding, Caroline's husband, was engaged in a heated exchange with another gentleman. Their voices carried across the lawn, drawing all attention. You have no right to be here, Harding was saying, his face flushed with anger. No right at all, after what you did. The other man, elderly, distinguished, vaguely familiar to Diana, replied with equal heat. I have every right to seek reconciliation with my son, regardless of your opinion. Graham went completely still beside her. Diana glanced up to find him pale, his jaw clenched so tightly she feared for his teeth. Graham, she whispered, what is it? We're leaving, he said abruptly, taking her elbow. Now. But we've only just. Now, Diana. His voice brooked no argument. As he steered her toward a side exit, the elderly gentleman looked up, his gaze locking with Graham's across the garden. Recognition dawned in the older man's eyes, followed by an expression of such naked hope that Diana felt her chest tighten in sympathy. Graham, the man called. Graham, wait. But Graham continued walking, his hand firm on Diana's elbow, guiding her swiftly through the shrubbery toward where their carriage waited. Only when they were safely inside and moving down the drive did he release her, slumping back against the squabs with his eyes closed. I apologize for the abrupt departure, he said after a moment, his voice strained. Who was that man? Diana asked quietly. Graham opened his eyes, regarding her with a mixture of resignation and wariness. My father-in-law, he said, from my first marriage. The journey back to Kensington House passed in stunned silence. Diana's mind whirled with this new information, this fundamental truth Graham had concealed. He was a widower. He had been married before, a fact he had deliberately hidden from her and from her father. As soon as they arrived home, Diana swept into the drawing room, waiting only until the door closed behind Graham before rounding on him. You were married before, she stated flatly. Were you planning to share that particular detail of your past, or was I to remain ignorant indefinitely? Graham moved to the sideboard, pouring himself a generous measure of brandy. My first marriage ended 8 years ago. It has no bearing on our present situation. No bearing, Diana repeated incredulously. You concealed your marital history, allowed my father to present you as a bachelor, and married me under false pretenses. I would say that has considerable bearing. He took a long swallow of brandy. The marriage lasted less than a year. It was a mistake from beginning to end. Was she? Diana hesitated, unsure she wanted the answer. Did you love her? Graham's laugh held no humor. I thought I did. I was 24, idealistic, easily deceived by a pretty face and practiced charm. He turned to face her, his expression bitter. Her name was Elizabeth Harding, Lord Harding's sister. Diana sank onto a nearby chair as understanding dawned. Caroline's sister-in-law. Yes, Graham drained his glass. Elizabeth and Caroline were great friends, conspirators, really. They shared everything, including, it seems, their amusements. His voice hardened. While I was in Scotland attending to business, Elizabeth began an affair with a cavalry officer. When I returned unexpectedly and discovered them, she was not repentant but angry at being caught. She claimed I had neglected her, that I was cold, unfeeling, that she had never loved me at all. Diana's anger began to give way to a confused sympathy. What happened? I offered her a choice: end the affair and attempt to salvage our marriage, or face divorce and scandal. His expression darkened. She chose the affair. I moved to file for divorce, a humiliating public process, as you know, but before the proceedings could begin, she and her lover were killed when their carriage overturned during a storm. And your brother? Diana asked quietly. How does he fit into this? Graham's hand tightened on his empty glass. George was just 20, home from Cambridge for the summer. He had always been impressionable, eager to please. Caroline set her sights on him, encouraging his infatuation while being secretly engaged to Harding. When Harding discovered their flirtation, he challenged George to a duel. His voice dropped to a near whisper. My brother had never held a pistol in his life. Diana closed her eyes, pain twisting in her chest. So you sought revenge against the Lockwood family by marrying me? No, Graham set down his glass with a sharp click. That's not, he broke off, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. It wasn't like that. Then explain it to me, Diana demanded, rising to face him. Explain why you chose me, why you married a woman you'd never met, why you've kept me at arm's length since the wedding. Graham paced to the window and back, his movements agitated. I had no intention of marrying again, ever. After Elizabeth, after George, I wanted nothing to do with society, with families, with emotional entanglements of any kind. He stopped, facing her directly. Then last autumn, I attended a musical evening at Lord Pembroke's London home. You were there, playing the pianoforte. Diana stared at him in confusion. I don't remember seeing you. You didn't. I arrived late, stood at the back of the room. You were playing Mozart, I believe. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You were extraordinary, not just your musical skill, but your expression, your complete absorption in the piece. When you finished, a young man approached you, clearly intending to flirt. You dispatched him with such wit and grace that half the room was laughing without quite knowing why, while the poor fellow himself retreated in confusion, unaware he'd been cleverly insulted. Despite herself, Diana felt a smile tugging at her lips. Mr. Danvers, he had been pursuing me relentlessly, despite my clear disinterest. You intrigued me, Graham admitted. I found myself attending events I would normally avoid, positioning myself where I could observe you without being noticed. I saw how you handled unwanted suitors, how you cared for elderly relations ignored by others, how you spoke your mind in a society that values female compliance above all. Diana's heart beat faster at this recitation of observations she had never suspected. You were watching me. Yes, he looked almost embarrassed. When I learned through business connections that Lord Lockwood was facing financial ruin, I saw an opportunity. I could help him, and in doing so, secure the hand of a woman I had come to admire from afar. But you never approached me directly, Diana said slowly. Never attempted courtship. Graham's expression clouded. I feared you would reject me outright if you knew my history, my connection to Caroline, to the Hardings. The scandal of my first marriage, though largely forgotten by society, left its mark. And he hesitated. I was a coward. It was easier to arrange a marriage of convenience than to risk genuine rejection. Diana absorbed this revelation in silence. Her husband had not married her for revenge, but because he admired her, had been drawn to her spirit, her character, qualities no previous suitor had valued. Yet he had denied them both the chance to develop natural affection by shrouding their union in secrets and distance. All these weeks, she said at last, you've kept me at a distance, treated me with polite indifference. If you admired me, why continue the charade after we were married? Graham moved closer, his expression earnest. I convinced myself it was for your protection, that by maintaining distance, I was respecting your position in an arranged marriage you had not wanted. In truth, I was protecting myself. His voice softened. I have not allowed myself to care deeply for anyone since George died. Caring leads to loss, to pain. It seemed safer to keep our arrangement formal, impersonal. And now, Diana asked, her voice barely above a whisper, now I find that safety is a poor substitute for happiness. He took another step toward her, close enough that she could see the varied shades of blue in his remarkable eyes. I have watched you these past weeks, your intelligence, your adaptability, your quiet strength. The woman I admired from afar pales in comparison to the woman I have come to know. Diana's breath caught in her throat. What are you saying, Graham? I'm saying I want a real marriage, he said simply. Not an arrangement, not a business transaction. I want to know what it might be like to share my life with you in truth, not merely in name. He reached out, his fingers hovering just short of touching her cheek. If you'll permit it. Diana stood perfectly still, her mind racing with conflicting emotions, anger at his deception, understanding of his pain, and beneath it all, a growing warmth she had been fighting since their first meeting. You should have told me the truth from the beginning, she said softly. Yes, he dropped his hand. I regret that more than you know. Diana took a deep breath. I need time to think, to process everything you've told me. Graham nodded, stepping back. Of course, take all the time you need. As Diana left the room, her thoughts in tumult, she realized that for the first time since their wedding, she had glimpsed the real Graham Kensington beneath the polite facade. A man shaped by loss and betrayal, yet still capable of admiration, of hope, perhaps even of love. For 3 days, Diana and Graham circled each other cautiously. Their conversations were cordial but subdued, both aware of the unresolved tension between them. Diana spent long hours walking in the gardens, thinking about Graham's revelations, about her own feelings, about the strange path that had led them to this crossroads. On the 4th day, a letter arrived bearing Lord Harding's seal. Graham received it at breakfast, his expression darkening as he read its contents. Is something wrong? Diana asked. Graham hesitated, then passed the letter to her. Harding has invited us to dine at his estate tomorrow evening. A family gathering, he calls it. Diana scanned the missive, noting its formal yet insistent tone. Your former father-in-law will be present. Yes, Graham's jaw tightened. I have avoided Edmund Wexley for 8 years. I have no desire to break that streak now. Diana studied her husband, seeing the tension in his shoulders, the wariness in his eyes. What happened between you? Graham stared into his coffee cup, as if it held answers. After Elizabeth died, her father blamed me, claimed my cruelty had driven her to the affair, to the reckless journey that killed her. When George died 6 months later, he publicly suggested that my treatment of Elizabeth had indirectly led to my brother's death as well. His voice roughened. As if I hadn't lost enough, as if I hadn't blamed myself enough already. Diana reached across the table, covering his clenched fist with her hand. We don't have to go. Graham looked up, surprised by the contact. Refusing would only fuel old gossip. Harding is powerful, connected. He could make things difficult for us socially. Let him try, Diana said firmly. I have no fear of society's opinion and less fear of Lord Harding. A genuine smile touched Graham's lips. No, you wouldn't, would you? He turned his hand beneath hers, their palms meeting. Perhaps it's time I faced these ghosts. Will you stand with me? Diana felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his words, at the trust implicit in them. Of course, she said softly. That's what marriage should be, isn't it? Standing together, facing the world as partners. Graham's fingers tightened around hers. Is that what you want, Diana? A true partnership? She met his gaze steadily. I think it's what we both want, what we both deserve. For a moment they remained thus, hands clasped across the breakfast table, a silent understanding passing between them. Then Graham lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then let us face the Hardings together, he said, and whatever comes after. The Harding estate loomed imposing against the twilight sky as their carriage approached the following evening. Diana, attired in a gown of deep burgundy that lent her a regal air, felt Graham's tension as a palpable thing beside her. Remember, she said quietly, we need only stay as long as propriety demands. At the first sign of unpleasantness, we shall develop simultaneous headaches and depart. That earned her a small smile, a sound strategy, Mrs. Kensington. I have been known for my strategic thinking, Mr. Kensington, she replied lightly, pleased when his smile widened. The evening began with excruciating politeness. Lord and Lady Harding received them with practiced civility. Caroline offered brittle compliments on Diana's gown, and various Harding relations regarded Graham with poorly disguised curiosity. Of Edmund Wexley, There was no immediate sign. It was during the interminable wait before dinner that he appeared, a distinguished gentleman with silver hair and Graham's extraordinary blue eyes. He entered the drawing-room quietly, but his presence immediately altered the atmosphere, tension crackling like lightning before a storm. Graham, engaged in conversation with Diana and an elderly aunt, did not immediately notice his former father-in-law's arrival. Diana observed Wexley's approach with growing concern, noting the mixture of determination and apprehension in his expression. "Graham," she murmured in warning, but it was too late. "Mr. Kensington," Wexley said, his voice carrying in the suddenly quiet room. "It has been far too long." Graham turned slowly, his face a mask of careful neutrality. "Mr. Wexley, I see congratulations are in order," Wexley continued, nodding toward Diana. "You've remarried." "Yes," Graham's voice was clipped. "May I present my wife, Mrs. Diana Kensington? Diana, this is Mr. Edmund Wexley." Diana extended her hand with deliberate grace. "Mr. Wexley, how do you do?" The older man bowed over her hand. "Charmed, Mrs. Kensington. I hope you will forgive an old man's curiosity about the woman who has succeeded where so many failed, in capturing Graham's heart." The barb was subtle but unmistakable. Before Diana could respond, Graham's hand came to rest at the small of her back, a possessive, protective gesture that sent warmth through her despite the circumstances. "Diana did not capture anything," Graham said evenly. "Ours is a partnership of mutual respect and choice." Wexley's eyebrows rose. "Indeed, how refreshing. And does this partnership include honesty about the past, about Elizabeth?" "Mr. Wexley," Diana interjected smoothly, "my husband has been completely forthcoming about his first marriage. I am fully aware of the circumstances and the tragedy of your daughter's passing." Surprise flickered across the older man's features, followed by something harder to define, perhaps respect. "I see, then you know more than most in this room, who believe Elizabeth died while innocently traveling with a family friend." Graham's body tensed beside her. "This is hardly the venue for such discussions." "On the contrary," Wexley replied, his voice lowering to prevent being overheard. "I've waited 8 years to speak with you, only to be consistently rebuffed. You leave me no choice but to seize this opportunity." Before Graham could retort, the dinner gong sounded, providing a momentary reprieve. As the company moved toward the dining room, Diana slipped her hand into Graham's, feeling the slight tremor in his fingers. "We can leave," she whispered. Graham shook his head. "No, whatever Wexley has to say, I'll hear it. Then perhaps we can finally put this ghost to rest." Dinner was an elaborate affair of 8 courses, each more exquisite than the last. Diana found herself seated between Lord Harding and a jovial cousin, with Graham directly across from her, flanked by Caroline and a matron of indeterminate relation. Wexley was positioned at the far end of the table, effectively preventing further conversation until the meal concluded. Throughout dinner, Diana was acutely aware of Caroline's attention to Graham, the too frequent touches to his arm, the intimate tone, the practiced flirtation. More concerning was Graham's reaction. Rather than the cold disdain he had shown at Lady Winthrop's garden party, he responded to Caroline with apparent interest, engaging in what seemed to be earnest conversation. By the time the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room, leaving the gentlemen to their port, Diana found herself unexpectedly unsettled. The easy connection she had felt with Graham that morning seemed distant, replaced by doubt. Had she misunderstood his intentions? Was his interest in a true marriage genuine or merely a momentary impulse? "Your husband is quite handsome," Caroline observed, settling beside Diana on a silk settee. "And more charming than I initially thought. You're fortunate, cousin." Diana forced a smile. "Indeed. Though I can't help wondering," Caroline continued, studying her wineglass, "how much you truly know about him. Men can be such mysteries, can't they? Especially men with pasts." "Some more than others," Diana agreed pleasantly. "For instance, some men are forthright about their history, while others conceal affairs behind their wives' backs." "Wouldn't you agree, Caroline?" Her cousin's smile froze. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "No," Diana took a sip of wine. "How curious. I was certain you would recall such incidents, particularly those involving duels. Caroline's face drained of color. You shouldn't believe everything you hear, Diana. Gossip can be so terribly distorted. Oh, I didn't hear it from gossip, Diana replied softly. I heard it from my husband, who, incidentally, was George Kensington's brother. Caroline's wineglass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the parquet floor. Conversation halted as servants rushed to clean the mess, allowing Caroline time to compose herself. When the chatter resumed, she leaned close to Diana, her voice a hiss. You're lying. Graham Kensington was abroad when George died. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows what they were told, Diana countered. The truth is often less convenient. Before Caroline could respond, the gentleman entered the drawing room. Diana immediately sought Graham, alarmed to find him engaged in what appeared to be a heated exchange with Wexley near the doorway. Lord Harding hovered nearby, his expression concerned. Diana rose, moving swiftly to her husband's side. As she approached, she caught fragments of their conversation. Tried to tell you for years, Wexley was saying, his voice urgent. The letters were in her desk, discovered after. Convenient timing, Graham replied, his tone bitter. 8 years of silence, then suddenly. Gentlemen, Diana interrupted smoothly, I believe Lady Harding is attempting to organize some musical entertainment. Perhaps we might continue this discussion another time. Graham glanced down at her, relief evident in his expression. Yes, in fact, I believe it's time we took our leave. The hour grows late. But you've only just arrived, Caroline protested, appearing at Diana's elbow. Surely you can stay for one song. Diana, I understand you play beautifully. Won't you favor us? Another time, perhaps, Diana demurred. I fear I have the beginnings of a headache. As do I, Graham added, a hint of dry humor returning to his voice. Most extraordinary coincidence. Farewells were exchanged with forced politeness, though Wexley pressed a sealed letter into Graham's hand as they departed, murmuring, Read it, please. For Elizabeth's sake, if not for mine. It was only when they were safely in their carriage, moving down the darkened drive, that Diana allowed herself to relax. Well, she said lightly, that was every bit as unpleasant as expected. Graham laughed, the sound startling in the darkness. You are remarkable, do you know that? He reached for her hand, entwining their fingers. Thank you for rescuing me, from Wexley, from the Hardings, from all of it. Diana squeezed his hand. That's what partners do, isn't it? Yes, his voice softened. Partners. They rode in comfortable silence for several minutes before Diana spoke again. You and Caroline seemed deep in conversation at dinner. Graham's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Caroline was attempting to ascertain how much I knew about her involvement with George. I was allowing her to incriminate herself. A note of satisfaction entered his voice. She had no idea who I was until you told her, did you? Diana smiled into the darkness. I might have mentioned it. I wish I'd seen her face. Graham shifted closer on the seat. What else did you discuss? Oh, she implied you had a mysterious past I knew nothing about. Diana leaned against his shoulder, surprising herself with the ease of the gesture. I implied she was a home-wrecking harpy who should mind her own affairs. Graham's chuckle rumbled against her side. Did you really? Well, not in those exact words. I am a lady, after all. Indeed you are. His free hand came up to brush a tendril of hair from her cheek. A lady of exceptional courage and wit, who has made an arrangement I dreaded into something I now cherish. Diana's heart quickened at the warmth in his voice, at the gentle touch of his fingers against her skin. And what of Wexley? What did he want? Graham sighed, the sound heavy in the darkness. He claims to have discovered letters after Elizabeth's death, correspondence between her and her lover that apparently absolves me of driving her to the affair. He's been trying to make amends, it seems. Do you believe him? I don't know. He was silent for a moment. For 8 years, I've lived with the belief that I failed as a husband, that I was too cold, too demanding, too focused on business to keep Elizabeth's affection. It became part of how I saw myself, part of why I believed I should never marry again. Diana turned to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the darkness. And now I wonder if I've been carrying guilt that was never mine to bear. His voice roughened. If I've denied myself happiness because of a lie. What happiness, Graham? Diana asked softly. His hand found her cheek, cradling it with exquisite gentleness. The happiness of a true marriage, of waking beside you each morning, of building a life, a family, a future together. He hesitated, vulnerability clear in his voice. If that's what you want. Diana covered his hand with her own, her heart full to bursting. It is what I want, very much. In the privacy of the darkened carriage, Graham's lips found hers in a kiss that began tentatively, then deepened as Diana responded with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing rapidly. I should warn you, Graham murmured against her hair, that if we continue this particular conversation, we may scandalize the coachman. Diana laughed, joy bubbling through her veins like champagne. Then perhaps we should continue it at home, in private. An excellent suggestion, Mrs. Kensington. Graham pressed another quick kiss to her lips. I find I'm suddenly very eager to return home. As the carriage continued through the night, Diana marveled at the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. Forced to marry a stranger, she had discovered not the cold arrangement she had feared, but a partner worthy of her heart. A man whose own heart, wounded by past betrayals, was finally ready to love again. And as Graham's arms tightened around her, Diana knew with perfect certainty that this marriage, begun in secrecy and obligation, would flourish in truth and love, a destiny neither of them had anticipated, yet both now embraced with open hearts.